The morning of November 18th, 1944, Commander Richard O'Kane stood in the conning tower of USS Tang, watching a Japanese convoy through his periscope. 24 torpedoes loaded, 10 tubes ready. Within hours, he'd fire his last fish, watch it circle back, and die in the explosion that sank his own submarine. But 3,000 miles away, another story was unfolding that would shatter every assumption Japanese admirals held about American submarine warfare. Commander Eugene Fluckey brought USS Barb to the surface in the Formosa Strait, radar sweeping the darkness for targets. The Gato-Class submarine carried 24 torpedoes, just like Tang. But what Japanese naval planners never expected was how fast these submarines could fire them all, how brazenly they'd attack heavily defended convoys, and how quickly they'd vanish before escorts could respond. The Japanese had built a defensive doctrine around submarines that behaved predictably. Fire from distance, submerge immediately, retreat to safety. American commanders like Fluckey had thrown that playbook into the Pacific and written their own. Surface attacks at point-blank range, rapid-fire torpedo spreads, high-speed escapes on the surface while Japanese destroyers dropped depth charges on empty water. The mathematics of this tactical revolution would devastate Japanese shipping. In 1944 alone, American submarines sank 492 Japanese merchant vessels, totaling over 2 million tons. The Gato-Class submarines formed the backbone of this carnage. 77 boats commissioned between November 1941 and April 1944. Each one carrying the same lethal package: 24 torpedoes, 10 tubes, 6 forward, 4 aft, and commanders who'd learned that audacity beat caution every single time. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Japanese naval doctrine in 1941 assumed submarines were support weapons for the decisive fleet battle. American submarines were supposed to scout ahead of the Pacific Fleet, report enemy positions, then attack battleships and carriers. Japanese planners had studied American pre-war doctrine extensively. They knew U.S. submarines emphasized fleet support over commerce raiding. They understood American torpedoes were designed to sink capital ships, not merchant vessels, and they absolutely believed American submarine commanders would follow the conservative tactics outlined in official Navy manuals. What Japanese admirals couldn't predict was that American submarine doctrine would transform completely within 2 years of war. The transformation started with the Mark 14 torpedo crisis. For 18 months, American submarines fired torpedoes that ran too deep, exploded prematurely, or failed to detonate at all. Submariners watched perfect attacks result in nothing. Torpedoes passing harmlessly beneath Japanese hulls, detonators failing on direct hits, the magnetic exploders triggering early from Earth's magnetic field. It was technological failure at catastrophic scale. But American submarine commanders didn't accept defects. They conducted their own tests, documented failures meticulously, pressured the Bureau of Ordnance until fixes were implemented. By September 1943, the Mark 14 worked reliably, and simultaneously, the electric Mark 18 torpedo entered service, leaving no wake to warn targets of incoming attack. Japanese forces never developed equivalent weapons. Their Type 95 torpedo was reliable from the start, but Japanese industry couldn't produce them in quantities approaching American output. The industrial disparity manifested in ways that shocked Japanese naval planners. American shipyards were building fleet submarines faster than combat could sink them. Electric Boat Company in Groton, Connecticut, Mare Island Naval Shipyard in California, Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in New Hampshire, Manitowoc Shipbuilding in Wisconsin. These facilities operated continuously, launching Gato-Class submarines at intervals Japanese yards couldn't match. A single Gato-Class submarine required approximately 140,000 parts manufactured by contractors in 32 states. The supply chain never faltered. When USS Flasher needed repairs after her third war patrol in August 1944, spare parts arrived immediately. When USS Rasher took battle damage from depth charges, replacement equipment was available within days. When USS Barb required modifications for rocket launchers, the work was completed in weeks. Japanese submarines damaged in combat often waited months for repairs due to parts shortages and industrial bottlenecks. The tactical revolution that destroyed Japanese shipping emerged from this industrial foundation, combined with technological superiority and commanders willing to rewrite doctrine in real time. Commander Dudley Morton pioneered the aggressive tactics aboard USS Wahoo in early 1943. He took his submarine into heavily defended harbors, attacked convoys on the surface at night, closed to ranges where torpedoes couldn't miss. His executive officer, Richard O'Kane, absorbed every lesson. When O'Kane took command of USS Tang in October 1943, he refined Morton's methods into systematic doctrine. Get close, fire accurately, reload fast, attack again before escorts could respond. The Gato-Class submarine's design enabled this aggressive warfare. 311 feet, 9 inches long, 27 feet, 3 inches beam, displacement of 1,526 tons surfaced, 2,424 tons submerged. 4 General Motors diesel engines providing 6,500 horsepower on the surface, 4 General Electric motors for submerged operations, maximum speed of 20 knots surfaced, nearly 9 knots submerged. The surface speed was critical. It allowed Gato-class submarines to outrun most Japanese escort vessels, but the real advantage lay in the fire control system and torpedo loadout. 10 21-inch torpedo tubes, 6 forward, 4 aft. 24, Mark 14, or Mark 18, torpedoes stored throughout the boat. Torpedomen could reload tubes in minutes with practiced efficiency. The tactical implication was staggering. A Gato-class submarine could fire all forward tubes, reload while maneuvering, and fire again before escorts closed to effective depth charge range. In a single attack, an aggressive commander could expend 6 to 12 torpedoes in rapid succession, overwhelm convoy defenses, and escape at high speed on the surface. Japanese convoy escorts in 1944 expected submarines to fire 2 or 3 torpedoes from distance, then dive and retreat. Their counterattack doctrine was built around this assumption. When radar detected a surfaced submarine, destroyers would charge toward the contact point, forcing the submarine to submerge. Once submerged, the submarine became vulnerable to depth charges and lost its speed advantage. Japanese escort doctrine worked perfectly against submarines that followed the rules. It failed catastrophically against commanders who didn't. The night of December 21st, 1944. Commander George Grider commanded USS Flasher on her 5th war patrol. His radar operator reported a heavily guarded convoy steaming through the South China Sea, multiple large ships, several escorts. Weather conditions were excellent. Grider positioned Flasher ahead of the convoy's projected course and waited. When the lead ships came within range, he made a decision that would have horrified pre-war American submarine doctrine. Instead of attacking from the seaward side, where escorts concentrated their patrols, he approached from the landward side, the direction escorts considered safe. At 1100 hours, Flasher surfaced. Grider closed to 3,500 yards and fired 6 torpedoes in rapid succession. 3 massive tankers, Omuro-san Maru, 9,204 tons, Ottawa-san Maru, 9,204 tons, Arita Maru, 10,238 tons. The torpedoes struck within minutes of each other. All 3 tankers erupted in flames. Japanese escorts believed they'd encountered a minefield. They never considered a submarine would attack from that angle, that close, that aggressively. Flasher disappeared into the darkness, while escorts dropped depth charges randomly. Grider had expended 6 torpedoes and sunk nearly 30,000 tons of irreplaceable tanker capacity in less than 20 minutes. It was precision devastation enabled by Gato-class capabilities and aggressive command philosophy. The attack demonstrated every advantage American submarines possessed. Radar that detected convoys, beyond visual range, speed that allowed positioning ahead of targets, firepower that could sink multiple ships before escorts responded, and commanders who understood that surprise and audacity were weapons as valuable as torpedoes. Japanese naval headquarters received reports of the attack with growing alarm. 3 tankers sunk simultaneously. No submarine detected before the attack. Escorts unable to make contact afterward. The pattern repeated across the Pacific throughout late 1944. Convoys ambushed by submarines that appeared from unexpected directions, fired devastating spreads of torpedoes, then vanished before counterattacks could be organized. Japanese admirals studied the reports and reached disturbing conclusions. American submarines weren't following doctrine anymore. They were operating with capabilities and tactics Japanese forces couldn't counter. The transformation was most visible in patrol results. In early 1943, before torpedo problems were fixed and aggressive tactics adopted, American submarines averaged about 1 ship sunk per patrol. By late 1944, elite commanders were sinking 5 to 10 ships per patrol. USS Rasher's 5th patrol between July and September 1944 resulted in 18 confirmed kills, totaling 99,901 tons. No other submarine patrol in history matched that devastation. Commander Henry Munson had taken everything O'Kane and Morton taught, combined it with improved torpedoes and excellent intelligence, and turned the South China Sea into a graveyard. The night of August 18th through 19th, 1944, Rasher and Bluefish operated as a wolf pack west of Luzon. Their radar detected a large convoy, multiple merchantmen, several escorts, targets worth the risk of coordinated attack. Munson positioned Rasher ahead of the convoy, while Bluefish approached from a different angle. When the convoy came within range, both submarines surfaced and attacked simultaneously. The Japanese escorts faced impossible tactical problems. 2 submarines attacking from different directions, multiple torpedoes in the water, merchantmen exploding and burning, escorts trying to protect ships while hunting submarines in darkness. Rasher fired 6 torpedoes at a tanker filled with aviation gasoline. The explosion sent flames 1,000 feet into the air. Debris fell hundreds of yards from the fireball. Japanese escorts panicked, firing randomly at shadows, dropping depth charges nowhere near the actual submarines. Munson reloaded tubes and fired again. Transport Taya Maru, carrier Tayo, cargo ship Eishin Maru. One ship after another erupted in flames or capsized and sank. Bluefish and USS Spadefish joined the attack, turning the convoy into an inferno. Over 4 hours, 3 American submarines sank at least 6 ships, totaling 64,000 tons. They accomplished this while heavily armed escorts searched futilely for targets that remained just beyond effective counterattack range. The tactical sophistication was remarkable. Munson and the other commanders weren't just firing torpedoes randomly. They calculated precise attack angles, estimated target tonnage, prioritized high-value ships, coordinated firing sequences to maximize confusion among escorts. They used the burning ships as illumination to identify additional targets. They exploited gaps in escort coverage. They surfaced and submerged repeatedly, keeping escorts guessing about their positions. It was submarine warfare, as high-speed chess played in darkness, with men's lives as stakes. Japanese convoy commanders who survived these attacks filed detailed battle reports. The reports reveal growing awareness that something had changed fundamentally in American submarine operations. One report from a convoy escort commander in September 1944 noted, "The enemy submarine fired approximately 12 torpedoes in rapid succession from close range. Our escorts could not locate the submarine afterward despite intensive search. This attack pattern differs from previous American submarine tactics. The enemy appears to possess improved radar and fire control systems we cannot match." Another report, this one from October 1944 after Convoy High 71 was devastated by Wolfpack attacks. American submarines attacked from multiple directions simultaneously. They surfaced during attacks, then disappeared before our escorts could respond. Conventional anti-submarine tactics prove ineffective against these methods. Recommend immediate development of improved radar and depth charge deployment systems. The recommendations went nowhere. Japanese industry couldn't produce the technology needed to counter American submarines. Radar sets weren't available in sufficient quantities until June 1944, and even then performed poorly compared to American systems. Japanese sonar was deficient. Detection. Ranges were shorter. Equipment was less reliable. Operators were less well trained. Anti-submarine doctrine emphasized aggressive pursuit of detected submarines, but this doctrine assumed submarines would behave predictably. Against commanders who attacked on the surface, reloaded while maneuvering at high speed, and used darkness and surprise as primary weapons, Japanese escorts were outmatched. The cumulative effect appeared in shipping loss statistics. January 1944, 200,000 gross tons sunk. February 1944, over 265,000 tons. March showed a temporary decrease when American submarines were diverted to support carrier task force operations. But April through December, the losses accelerated. In November 1944, American submarines sank 78 Japanese ships totaling over 300,000 tons. The Japanese merchant marine, which stood at approximately 6 million tons in December 1941, had fallen to 3 million tons by late 1944 and was declining rapidly. Commander Eugene Fluckey's patrols aboard USS Barb exemplified how Gato-Class submarines and aggressive tactics devastated Japanese shipping. Fluckey took command in May 1944 with a promise to sink 5 ships on his first patrol. USS Barb had sunk only 1 ship in 6 previous patrols under a more cautious commander. Fluckey intended to prove that aggressive tactics worked. His 8th War Patrol took Barb into the Sea of Okhotsk, waters the Japanese considered relatively safe due to distance from American bases and harsh environmental conditions. On May 31, 1944, Barb encountered a convoy of 4 freighters with destroyer escort. Fluckey positioned Barb ahead of the convoy and waited. When the ships came within range, he surfaced and attacked. 6 torpedoes fired, 6 hits, 2 freighters sank within minutes. The destroyer charged toward Barb's position, but Fluckey had already reloaded and repositioned. He fired 3 more torpedoes. The destroyer evaded, but Fluckey wasn't targeting escorts. He was targeting the remaining freighters. Over the next several hours, Barb sank 5 ships and 2 sampans. Fluckey returned to Midway, having kept his promise. His subsequent patrols demonstrated systematic application of aggressive doctrine. Patrol 9, 11 ships sunk, including the escort carrier Unyo. Patrol 10, multiple ships destroyed in the East China Sea. Patrol 11, the legendary penetration of Namquan Harbour on the China coast, where Fluckey took Barb into shallow, heavily mined waters and torpedoed ships at anchor. Maneuvering through minefields in uncharted waters, Barb fired torpedoes into anchored vessels, then escaped at high speed on the surface through waters Japanese commanders thought impenetrable to submarines. The Namquan Harbour attack, on January 22 through 23, 1945, became legendary. Barb approached the harbour submerged, navigated past known mine positions, then surfaced inside the anchorage where approximately 30 Japanese ships sat at anchor. Fluckey fired torpedoes at multiple targets in rapid succession. Ships exploded, burned, capsized. Japanese shore batteries opened fire, but Barb was already racing toward the harbour entrance at flank speed. For over an hour, Fluckey navigated through uncharted, mined waters with shells splashing around his submarine. Barb emerged undamaged. 4 Japanese ships sank. The bold action earned Fluckey the Medal of Honor and demonstrated that no harbour, no anchorage, no supposedly safe water offered protection from American submarines commanded by officers willing to take calculated risks. The tactical evolution that commanders like Fluckey, O'Kane, Munson, and Grider pioneered became standard doctrine. By late 1944, submarine school was teaching aggressive surface attacks, coordinated wolfpack operations, and rapid-fire torpedo tactics. Young submarine commanders, arriving in the Pacific, learned from patrol reports documenting successful attacks. They studied how elite commanders positioned their submarines, calculated attack angles, managed torpedo spreads, evaded escorts. The knowledge transfer was systematic. Every successful patrol generated detailed reports. Every innovative tactic was analyzed and disseminated. American submarine warfare evolved continuously, incorporating lessons learned from hundreds of patrols. Japanese convoy defense couldn't keep pace. The Grand Escort Fleet, established in November 1943 to coordinate convoy protection, operated with insufficient ships, inadequate technology, and doctrine that assumed submarines would behave conservatively. Japanese destroyer escorts, the Gato-Class vessels, designed specifically for convoy duty, entered service too late and in insufficient numbers. By late 1944, only 32 had been completed. They featured improved sonar, radar, and could carry up to 60 depth charges. But against submarines that attacked on the surface at high speed, depth charges were irrelevant until the submarines submerged. And aggressive American commanders stayed surfaced as long as possible, maximizing their speed and maneuverability advantages. The intelligence advantage compounded Japanese problems. American codebreakers had cracked the Maru Code in January 1943. This code governed routing of Japanese merchant shipping. Daily position reports from convoys, combined with scheduled departure and arrival information, allowed American intelligence to plot Japanese merchant movements in real time. Submarine commanders received encrypted messages, directing them to intercept specific convoys at predetermined locations. The submarines didn't need to search randomly. Intelligence told them exactly where targets would be, when they'd arrive, what ships would be present. It was systematic hunting enabled by signals intelligence, coordinated through Pacific Fleet headquarters at Pearl Harbor. Japanese naval communications security was catastrophically poor. Convoy routing messages were broadcast in code Japanese commanders believed unbreakable. American cryptanalysts at Station Hypo in Pearl Harbor decrypted these messages routinely. Within 30 minutes of intercepting a Japanese convoy routing message, Station Hypo could transmit targeting information to submarines on patrol. The submarines would receive encrypted messages, directing them to specific coordinates at specific times. When they arrived, convoys appeared exactly as predicted. It was turkey shooting, enabled by intelligence superiority Japanese forces never suspected. The combination of technological advantages, tactical innovation, industrial capacity, and intelligence superiority created a mathematical inevitability. Japanese merchant shipping couldn't survive against American submarines. Every ship lost meant cargo that didn't reach its destination. Rice from Southeast Asia couldn't feed Japanese cities. Oil from the Dutch East Indies couldn't fuel Japanese aircraft. Raw materials from conquered territories couldn't support Japanese industry. By 1945, American submarines were experiencing difficulty finding targets. The Japanese merchant marine had been virtually eliminated. But in late 1944, Japanese admirals were still struggling to understand what had happened. Their pre-war assumptions about submarine warfare had proven completely wrong. American submarines didn't scout for the fleet. They hunted merchant shipping with systematic ruthlessness. American submarine commanders didn't follow conservative doctrine. They rewrote tactics based on what worked in combat. American torpedoes, once defective, now worked reliably and were produced in overwhelming quantities. American submarines, built rapidly by efficient shipyards, replaced losses, and expanded the fleet continuously. Everything Japanese planners assumed about American submarine limitations had been wrong. The human cost to Japanese submariners and convoy escorts who faced this technological and tactical onslaught was devastating. Merchant sailors who'd survived one submarine attack faced another on the next voyage. Escort commanders who'd barely escaped previous encounters knew the next attack might succeed. The psychological impact was profound. Japanese convoy operations in late 1944 were characterized by fear and inevitability. Ships departed port knowing submarines were hunting them. Escorts scanned radar and sonar, knowing American submarines possessed better detection systems. Convoy commanders followed routes, knowing American intelligence probably knew their schedules. The ocean had become enemy territory where survival was largely luck. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The night convoy High 72 departed Singapore in September 1944, carried troops and supplies desperately needed for defense of the Philippines. The convoy included multiple transports, several tankers, ammunition ships, and a relatively strong escort force. Japanese planners knew American submarines were active in the South China Sea. They scheduled the convoy to depart when intelligence suggested submarine activity was lower. They assigned experienced escort commanders. They equipped ships with the best available radar and sonar. They believed these precautions would give the convoy reasonable chance of reaching its destination safely. They were wrong. American intelligence had decrypted the convoy routing messages days before departure. USS Rasher, Bluefish, Paddle, Pargo, and Growler received targeting information positioning them along the convoy's route. The submarines arrived at their stations and waited. When convoy High 72 appeared on radar, 5 American submarines were ready. The attack began at dawn on September 12, 1944. Growler fired first, torpedoing transport Hinode Maru. Within hours, multiple submarines were attacking simultaneously from different angles. Japanese escorts tried desperately to protect their charges, but they faced impossible tactical problems. Submarines attacked on the surface at high speed, fired torpedo spreads from multiple directions, then disappeared before escorts could organize counterattacks. Hinode Maru, Nankei Maru, Shinko Maru, Teiko Maru, Nankei Maru, and Asaka Maru, 6 ships sunk in a single day. Over 4,000 Japanese soldiers and crew died. Surviving ships scattered, attempting to reach safety individually. Several were sunk over the following days. Of the 10 ships that departed Singapore, only 4 reached the Philippines, and most of those sustained damage. Convoy High 72's destruction demonstrated that even heavily escorted, carefully routed convoys couldn't survive against American submarine wolfpacks operating with intelligence advantage and aggressive tactics. The battle reports filed by surviving Japanese escort commanders reveal shock and confusion. One report noted, "Enemy submarines demonstrated coordination and technology exceeding our defensive capabilities. Multiple torpedoes struck simultaneously from different bearings. Our radar detected surfaced submarines, but they disappeared before we could close to effective range. American submarine performance suggests technological developments we were not aware of. Recommend immediate review of convoy defense doctrine and equipment." Another report was more blunt. "Current escort methods cannot protect convoys against American submarine tactics. Enemy submarines attack on surface at high speed, fire multiple torpedoes rapidly, and evade before our depth charges can be deployed effectively. Unless submarine detection technology and escort vessel speed are improved dramatically, convoy losses will continue at unsustainable rates." The recommendations went unheeded because Japanese industry couldn't produce the improvements needed. The technological gap was too wide. The industrial disparity was too great. By late 1944, Japan was losing the production war as comprehensively as the tactical war. American shipyards were building submarines faster than Japan could sink them. American factories were producing torpedoes, radar sets, and sonar systems in quantities Japan couldn't approach. American training programs were graduating submarine officers faster than combat casualties reduced their numbers. The mathematical advantage was overwhelming and growing worse monthly. Commander Richard O'Kane's patrols aboard USS Tang embodied the apex of aggressive submarine warfare before his capture in October 1944. Tang's first 4 patrols between January and October 1944 resulted in 24 confirmed ships sunk. O'Kane had refined Morton's tactics into systematic doctrine. Close to point-blank range, fire precisely calculated spreads, reload while maneuvering at high speed, attack again before escorts could respond. His crews trained relentlessly until they could reload torpedo tubes in darkness, crash dive in under 1 minute, operate efficiently while exhausted and stressed. Tang's 4th patrol demonstrated O'Kane's methods at their most effective. Between October 10th and October 24th, 1944, Tang sank 13 enemy ships in just 14 days. The patrol began with a convoy attack off Formosa. O'Kane identified a heavily escorted formation and decided to attack from the landward side where escorts were thinnest. He closed to 2,000 yards and fired 6 torpedoes in rapid succession. 3 ships sunk before escorts could respond. Tang repositioned and attacked again. More torpedoes, more sinkings. Over 2 weeks, O'Kane hunted convoys with relentless efficiency. On October 23rd, Tang encountered American aircraft attacking a Japanese convoy. The planes had hit several ships, leaving survivors in the water, including downed American airmen. Standard procedure was to avoid the area since surfacing near enemy survivors invited attack. O'Kane ignored procedure. He brought Tang to the surface in broad daylight in enemy-controlled waters and began rescuing American pilots. For 30 minutes, Tang remained exposed, while O'Kane's crew pulled 22 downed airmen from the water. Japanese aircraft circled overhead but held fire because they had survivors in the water too. O'Kane used that hesitation to complete the rescue, then crash-dived just as a patrol plane began its attack run. The bombs missed. The rescued airmen huddled in Tang's cramped interior, stunned that a submarine commander would risk his boat and crew to save them. O'Kane simply noted in his log that leaving American pilots to drown wasn't acceptable regardless of tactical considerations. It was the kind of decision that separated great commanders from merely good ones. O'Kane understood that submarine warfare wasn't just mathematics and tactics. It was leadership under extreme pressure. It was making split-second decisions that balanced mission objectives against moral imperatives. It was maintaining crew morale when asking men to charge into situations other submarines fled from. By October 24th, Tang had expended 23 of her 24 torpedoes. 13 ships confirmed sunk in 14 days. O'Kane had 1 torpedo remaining and intended to use it before heading home with a perfect patrol record. That final torpedo would malfunction, circle back, and sink Tang. But before that tragic conclusion, O'Kane had demonstrated everything Gato-Class submarines and aggressive commanders could accomplish when given proper tools and authority to operate without excessive caution. The tactical revolution that O'Kane, Fluckey, Munson, Grider, and dozens of other commanders pioneered transformed submarine warfare fundamentally. They proved that submarines weren't just scouts or auxiliary weapons. Properly employed, submarines could dominate ocean lanes, devastate enemy commerce, and achieve strategic results disproportionate to their numbers. The 77 Gato-Class submarines that served in World War II accounted for enormous percentages of Japanese shipping losses. Combined with the improved Balao-class submarines that followed, American fleet submarines sank over 1,300 Japanese ships, totaling approximately 5.5 million tons. The strategic impact went beyond tonnage statistics. Every merchant ship sunk meant troops that didn't reach defensive positions. Every tanker destroyed meant aircraft that couldn't fly. Every cargo vessel sent to the bottom meant factories that couldn't produce munitions. American submarines didn't win the Pacific War alone, but they made Japanese defeat inevitable by strangling the resource imports that kept Japan's war machine operating. By 1945, Japan's merchant fleet was effectively destroyed. Ships that survived stayed in port rather than risk submarines. Raw materials sat in captured territories because no transport capacity remained to move them. Japanese factories shut down for lack of raw materials. Japanese cities faced starvation because rice couldn't be imported from Southeast Asia. The conclusion Japanese admirals reached by early 1945 was stark and undeniable. American submarines had won the commerce warfare campaign comprehensively. The decisive factor wasn't individual ship sinkings or heroic patrols. It was systematic, sustained destruction enabled by technological superiority, tactical innovation, industrial capacity, and intelligence advantage that Japanese forces couldn't counter or compensate for. The Gato-Class submarine, and commanders willing to exploit its capabilities, had accomplished what Japanese planners believed impossible. They turned the Pacific Ocean from Japanese highway into American killing ground where nothing moved safely and survival was temporary at best. The transformation of American submarine warfare between 1941 and 1945 represented more than tactical evolution. It demonstrated how industrial democracies could adapt doctrine faster than authoritarian militaries anticipated. Japanese naval planning assumed American forces would follow pre-war doctrine rigidly. American institutional culture emphasized regulations, procedures, and conservative risk assessment. Japanese admirals studied American submarine manuals and believed they understood how U.S. submarines would operate in combat. Every assumption proved wrong because American submarine culture rewarded innovation from below, while Japanese naval culture enforced doctrine from above. When American submarine commanders discovered Mark 14 torpedoes were defective, they didn't wait for bureaucracy to fix the problem. They conducted their own tests at sea. USS Wahoo's crew performed unauthorized test firings against cliffs in Australia to measure actual running depth. USS Tynosa fired 11 torpedoes at a stationary tanker and watched them fail to explode. Commander Lawrence Duspit saved his last torpedo, brought it back to Pearl Harbor, and demanded it be test-fired at San Francisco Bay. The torpedo hit the net, failed to explode, and the defect was finally proven conclusively. Submarine commanders forced change by documenting failures and refusing to accept bureaucratic dismissals. This bottom-up innovation culture extended to tactics. When Dudley Morton demonstrated aggressive surface attacks worked, other commanders adopted his methods immediately. There was no formal doctrine change, no official approval process. Submarine commanders simply started attacking like Morton, because the results spoke for themselves. The Navy's submarine command under Admiral Charles Lockwood encouraged this experimentation. Lockwood protected aggressive commanders from criticism, promoted successful innovators, and systematically replaced cautious commanders with officers willing to take calculated risks. By mid-1944, the submarine force had essentially selected for aggression through combat Darwinism. Japanese naval culture operated differently. Doctrine came from Imperial Japanese Navy headquarters. Commanders who deviated from established procedures faced censure regardless of results. Innovation required approval from multiple bureaucratic layers. By the time improved tactics reached operational forces, circumstances had changed. Japanese escort commanders filed detailed reports recommending tactical and technological improvements throughout 1944. Most recommendations were acknowledged and filed. Few were implemented because implementation required resources Japanese industry couldn't provide, and doctrinal changes the naval bureaucracy wouldn't authorize. The human cost of this institutional rigidity was staggering. Japanese merchant sailors and convoy escorts paid with their lives for leadership failures they couldn't control. A destroyer escort commander who survived convoy High 71's destruction in September 1944 later told American interrogators that he'd submitted detailed recommendations for improved radar, revised escort formations, and better communication protocols months before the convoy sailed. None were implemented. He watched American submarines destroy his convoy using tactics he'd warned about, with technology he'd requested countermeasures for, exploiting vulnerabilities he'd documented. His ship survived. Most didn't. Over 3,000 men died because institutional inertia prevented adaptation. The scale of American submarine success became apparent when Japanese cabinet ministers reviewed shipping statistics in early 1945. The numbers were catastrophic. Monthly shipping losses exceeded replacement capacity by factors of 3 or 4. Critical materials weren't reaching Japanese factories. Oil reserves were depleting despite conservation measures. Food supplies for major cities were approaching crisis levels. One minister later testified that the submarine campaign accomplished more toward Japanese defeat than strategic bombing, surface naval action, or island campaigns combined. Submarines strangled Japan's economy silently and systematically, while the world focused on dramatic battles elsewhere. The tactical sophistication American submarine commanders developed went beyond simply firing torpedoes aggressively. They created integrated attack systems that maximized every advantage. Radar detected convoys at 20-mile ranges in good conditions. Commanders would track targets for hours, studying formation patterns, identifying high-value ships, noting escort behavior. They'd position their submarines ahead of the convoy's projected course, calculating optimal attack angles that put the submarine between the convoy and potential escape routes. They'd wait until darkness or weather conditions favored attack, then strike with precisely timed torpedo spreads designed to create maximum confusion among escorts. Commander Henry Munson's attack on convoy Me-27 on August 18, 1944, demonstrated this systematic approach. Rasher's radar detected the convoy at dusk. Munson tracked the formation for 3 hours, identifying 3 tankers as primary targets. He positioned Rasher ahead of the convoy on the landward side where escorts were lighter. At 2300 hours, he surfaced and began his approach. When range closed to 1400 yards, he fired 6 torpedoes in rapid succession. The first 3 targeted Teo Maru, a tanker loaded with aviation gasoline. 2 hit. The tanker erupted in a fireball visible for miles. The next 3 torpedoes targeted transport Teo Maru. 2 hit amidships, breaking the vessel's back. She capsized in minutes. Escorts charged toward where they believed Rasher had been, but Munson was already repositioning at high speed on the surface. He reloaded forward tubes while maneuvering parallel to the convoy. 15 minutes after the first attack, Rasher fired again. 3 torpedoes at carrier Taiyo, 2 hits. The carrier began listing immediately. Munson reloaded again and fired at cargo transport Ishin Maru. 2 hits. The transport broke apart and sank within 5 minutes. Bluefish and spadefish joined the attack from different angles. The convoy dissolved into chaos. Burning ships illuminated the ocean. Escorts fired randomly at shadows. Depth charges detonated in empty water. Over 4 hours, 3 American submarines systematically destroyed 6 ships totaling over 60,000 tons. Not a single submarine was damaged. The escorts never established effective contact with any attacking submarine. It was clinical destruction enabled by radar superiority, speed advantage, coordinated tactics, and commanders who understood that decisive action beat cautious observation. Japanese convoy commanders who survived these attacks filed reports that grew increasingly desperate in tone. A report from October 1944 noted, "American submarines now operate with coordination, suggesting central command direction. Multiple submarines attack from different bearings simultaneously. They fire more torpedoes more rapidly than our doctrine anticipated. They remain surfaced during attacks, using speed to evade our escorts. Unless fundamental changes are made to convoy defense capabilities, shipping losses will continue at rates that threaten our ability to continue prosecuting the war." The phrase, "threaten our ability to continue prosecuting the war," appeared in multiple reports from late 1944. Japanese naval officers understood the submarine campaign was strangling their nation's war economy. They documented it. They recommended countermeasures. They pleaded for resources. Nothing came because nothing could come. Japanese industry was stretched beyond capacity. Shipyards couldn't build escort vessels fast enough. Factories couldn't produce radar sets in needed quantities. Training facilities couldn't graduate enough anti-submarine warfare specialists. The gap between what Japanese convoy defense needed and what Japanese industry could provide widened monthly. By November 1944, American submarines were attacking even the most heavily defended convoys with near impunity. Convoy High 81 departed Japan on November 14th, carrying troops and supplies for Singapore and the Philippines. The convoy included 2 escort carriers, Shinyo and Akitsu Maru, multiple destroyers and destroyer escorts, plus various support vessels. It was one of the most heavily defended convoys Japan assembled. Japanese planners believed the escorts would deter or destroy any attacking submarines. Over the next 4 days, American submarines systematically destroyed the convoy, sinking 4 major ships, including both escort carriers. Nearly 7,000 Japanese personnel died. The Americans sustained no casualties. USS Spadefish sank Shinyo on November 17th with 4 torpedoes. The carrier caught fire and sank in minutes. Only 70 survivors were rescued from over 1,200 crew. The next day, USS Archerfish torpedoed and sank Shinyo's sister ship, Shinano, though Shinano wasn't part of convoy High 81. The psychological impact on Japanese naval forces was profound. If escort carriers specifically designed to protect convoys from submarines couldn't survive American attacks, what could? The answer, increasingly apparent by December 1944, was nothing. No escort force, no defensive measure, no tactical innovation could protect Japanese shipping from American submarines operating with technological and tactical superiority. The human dimension of submarine warfare often disappeared beneath tonnage statistics and tactical analysis. But for the men who fought in submarines, combat was intensely personal and psychologically brutal. American submarine crews understood that their service had the highest casualty rate in the Navy. 22% of submariners who went on patrol never returned. 52 submarines were lost during the war. 3,500 men died. Every patrol carried the knowledge that depth charges, mechanical failure, mines, or aircraft could kill them far from home in waters so deep their bodies would never be recovered. Japanese merchant sailors and convoy escorts faced even worse odds. By late 1944, sailing on a Japanese merchant ship was nearly suicidal. Every voyage brought submarine attacks. Survivors of one sinking would board another ship, knowing the next attack was coming. Merchant marine casualty rates exceeded even Japanese army infantry losses. Thousands of sailors died not in dramatic battles but in the cold mathematics of unrestricted submarine warfare. Ships torpedoed at night, men thrown into dark water, escorts unable to stop for rescue operations because staying in place invited additional attacks. Bodies floating in oil slicks, drowning slowly because rescue would never come. The ethical dimensions of unrestricted submarine warfare troubled some American commanders. Sinking merchant ships meant killing civilian sailors. Attacking troop transports meant drowning thousands of soldiers who had no chance to fight back. One submarine commander wrote in his patrol report, "We torpedoed and sank a large transport. Post-war intelligence indicated over 3,000 Japanese soldiers died when the ship capsized. They drowned, trapped below decks. It was necessary for winning the war, but I cannot pretend it was. Heroic. We killed men who couldn't defend themselves. That's the reality of submarine warfare. We don't fight fair. We attack from ambush and vanish before the enemy can respond. It's effective, it's necessary, but it's not romantic." That cold assessment captured submarine warfare's essential nature. It was systematic killing at industrial scale. American submarines didn't defeat the Japanese Navy in dramatic surface battles. They strangled Japan's economy by sinking cargo vessels, tankers, and transports. They killed merchant sailors and soldiers by the thousands. They destroyed ships carrying rice to feed Japanese civilians and oil to fuel Japanese aircraft. The strategic results justified the methods, but the methods were brutal, efficient, and impersonal. A submarine commander might sink 10 ships in a patrol and never see the men dying when those ships went down. Japanese submarine crews experienced the inverse trauma. They watched American anti-submarine warfare technology systematically eliminate their boats. By 1944, Japanese submarine losses were accelerating. American destroyer escorts, equipped with modern sonar, hunted Japanese submarines with deadly efficiency. Aircraft equipped with radar-detected surfaced submarines and attacked with depth bombs before the submarines could dive. Convoy escorts that once fled from submarine contacts now pursued aggressively, knowing they possessed technological advantages. Japanese submariners understood they were being hunted by forces they couldn't counter. The psychological burden was crushing. A Japanese submarine officer who survived the war told American interrogators, "By mid-1944, we knew every patrol might be our last. American aircraft could find us on the surface. American destroyers could track us underwater. We heard about submarines that simply disappeared, lost with all hands to attacks we never detected. The ocean belonged to America. We were operating in enemy territory every time we left port. The only question was whether we'd encounter American forces before completing our mission or after. The technological asymmetry extended to every aspect of submarine operations. American submarines could remain at sea for 75 days with adequate food, water, and fuel. Japanese submarines had similar endurance, but American industrial capacity meant replacement submarines arrived whenever one was lost. Japanese submarine losses couldn't be replaced at equivalent rates. By 1945, Japan's submarine force was a shadow of its December 1941 strength. Most experienced crews were dead. Training programs couldn't replace losses fast enough. New submarines emerged from shipyards months behind schedule due to materials shortages and Allied bombing. American submarine production never faltered. Electric Boat Company launched Gato-Class submarines at intervals measured in weeks. Mare Island Naval Shipyard maintained similar production rates. Manitowoc Shipbuilding in Wisconsin built 28 submarines during the war, shipping them down the Mississippi River to the Gulf of Mexico for final outfitting. The production system was so efficient that submarines damaged in combat could return to yards, receive repairs and upgrades, and return to patrol within months. USS Barb received rocket launcher modifications, new radar, upgraded sonar, and other improvements between patrols. Japanese submarines damaged in combat waited months for basic repairs. The cumulative impact of American submarine operations appeared in Japanese war planning documents from early 1945. Imperial General Headquarters acknowledged that raw materials imports had fallen below minimum requirements for continued war production. Oil reserves were insufficient to support planned operations. Food supplies for major cities were approaching crisis levels, requiring domestic rationing that risked civilian morale. 1. Planning. Document stated bluntly, "The American submarine campaign has reduced our merchant tonnage to levels insufficient for maintaining both military operations and civilian economy. Unless shipping losses can be reduced dramatically, the continuation of the war beyond mid-1945 becomes increasingly difficult regardless of other military factors." The admission represented complete strategic failure. Japan had entered war, assuming it could defend the shipping lanes connecting home islands to conquered territories. Japanese naval doctrine emphasized fleet battles and offensive operations. Commerce protection received low priority. Anti-submarine warfare was considered secondary to engaging American carriers and battleships. These doctrinal decisions proved catastrophic. While Japanese submarines hunted American warships with minimal success, American submarines systematically destroyed the merchant fleet that kept Japan's war economy functioning. The irony was profound. Japan possessed impressive submarine technology. The I-400 class submarines were the largest in the world until nuclear-powered vessels appeared decades later. They could circumnavigate the globe without refueling. They carried aircraft in watertight hangars. They represented remarkable engineering. But they accomplished nothing strategically because Japanese submarine doctrine emphasized fleet support over commerce raiding. Meanwhile, American submarines, operating under doctrine that emphasized commerce destruction, strangled Japan's economy systematically. When American forces occupied Japan in August 1945, naval intelligence officers interviewed Japanese submarine commanders and convoy escort officers. The interviews revealed that Japanese naval leadership understood the submarine threat by mid-1944 but couldn't marshal resources to counter it. One Rear Admiral who commanded convoy escort operations from November 1944 through August 1945 told interrogators, "We knew American submarines were destroying our shipping. We filed reports documenting losses. We recommended improvements to radar, sonar, escort tactics, and convoy routing. Most recommendations required industrial capacity we didn't possess. We needed better technology, more escort vessels, improved training. We received none of these in quantities that mattered. By early 1945, I knew we'd lost the shipping war. The question wasn't whether we could protect convoys. It was whether any shipping could continue at all." The frankness of post-war Japanese assessments provided validation for American submarine commanders who'd risked everything prosecuting the unrestricted submarine campaign. They'd been right to adopt aggressive tactics, right to fire torpedoes at merchant vessels, right to attack convoys relentlessly, regardless of escort strength, right to surface during attacks and use speed as primary defense. Every unconventional tactic, every deviation from pre-war doctrine, every risk that looked reckless to conservative observers had been vindicated by results. American submarines sank over 1,300 Japanese ships. They destroyed 56% of Japan's merchant marine. They killed tens of thousands of enemy sailors and soldiers. They strangled Japan's war economy so effectively that continuation of the war became impossible, regardless of what happened on Pacific Islands or in the Japanese home islands. The legacy of Gato-Class submarines and the commanders who exploited their capabilities extended far beyond World War II. The tactical innovations pioneered between 1942 and 1945 became foundational doctrine for submarine forces worldwide. Aggressive surface attacks, coordinated wolfpack operations, systematic targeting of commerce, integration of intelligence with tactical operations. These methods shaped submarine warfare for decades. Modern submarine doctrine still emphasizes many principles proven in the Pacific: get close, fire accurately, evade quickly, attack again. The technology developed for Gato-class submarines influenced post-war submarine design directly. Improved sonar systems, better radar, more efficient diesel-electric propulsion, streamlined hull forms for higher underwater speed. Every advancement made during the war carried forward into peacetime submarine development. When the U.S. Navy transitioned to nuclear propulsion in the 1950s, the tactical foundation remained rooted in lessons learned aboard Gatos, Balaos, and Tenches, hunting Japanese shipping. The human legacy was equally profound. Commanders like Eugene Fluckey, Richard O'Kane, Dudley Morton, and dozens of others demonstrated that tactical innovation could overcome technological limitations and doctrinal conservatism. They proved that junior officers could influence strategic outcomes when allowed to operate without excessive oversight. They showed that aggressive action, when backed by proper intelligence and technology, achieved results that cautious operations couldn't approach. These lessons transcended submarine warfare. They influenced how American military services approached doctrine development, tactical innovation, and command authority throughout the Cold War and beyond. For Japanese survivors of the submarine campaign, the lessons were equally clear but more painful. They'd witnessed firsthand how technological inferiority, industrial weakness, and doctrinal rigidity produced catastrophic results. The merchant sailors who survived torpedo attacks carried those memories into post-war Japan. The naval officers who'd filed unanswered recommendations for improved convoy defense understood how institutional failures killed their men. The submariners who'd operated knowing American forces possessed overwhelming technological advantages learned that courage and skill couldn't compensate for systemic disadvantages. These lessons influenced post-war Japanese industrial development and military doctrine. Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force, established in the 1950s, emphasized technological excellence and flexibility over rigid adherence to doctrine. Japanese industry focused on quality control, continuous improvement, and rapid adaptation to changing circumstances. The economic miracle that transformed Japan from devastated loser to industrial powerhouse was informed partly by lessons learned during the war. Never again would Japanese forces enter conflict assuming they could overcome technological disadvantages through superior spirit or rigid discipline. The submarine campaign had taught that lesson conclusively. The statistics that defined the submarine war tell only part of the story. 1,300 ships sunk, 5.5 million tons destroyed, 56% of Japanese merchant marine eliminated. These numbers represent strategic victory at scale rarely achieved by single weapon systems. But behind the statistics were individual decisions by submarine commanders who chose aggression over caution, innovation over doctrine, decisive action over safe procedure. Men like Mush Morton, who took Wahoo into defended harbours, Richard O'Kane, who rescued downed pilots under fire. Henry Munson, who sank more tonnage in single patrol than most submarines accomplished in entire careers. Eugene Fluckey, who penetrated mined harbors and shelled Japanese factories. These commanders understood that submarine warfare at its core was about calculated risk-taking. Every attack involved risk. Fire torpedoes from too close and escorts could ram before you escape. Fire from too far and torpedoes might miss or malfunction. Attack heavily defended convoys and depth charges might crack your hull. Avoid heavily defended convoys and miss opportunities to damage enemy war effort significantly. The commanders who achieved greatest success consistently chose more risk, closer range, bolder tactics. They trusted their crews, their equipment, their intelligence, and their own judgment. When caution suggested retreat, they attacked. When doctrine recommended patience, they struck immediately. When regulations specified minimum safe distances, they closed to point-blank range. The Japanese merchant marine never recovered from the devastation. Ships that survived to August 1945 were mostly damaged, under-maintained, and barely operational. Japanese shipyards that had built merchant vessels were destroyed by bombing or lacked materials for construction. The sailors who'd survived torpedo attacks often refused to return to sea. The psychological trauma of watching ships explode, spending hours in cold water waiting for rescue that might never come, seeing companions drown because rescue was impossible, these experiences broke men. Post-war Japanese merchant marine recruitment struggled for years because survivors told their families what submarine warfare really meant. It meant death from invisible enemies. It meant drowning in darkness. It meant watching thousands die because commerce had to be destroyed to win wars. American submariners faced their own psychological challenges after the war. They'd won decisively. They'd sunk more enemy shipping than any submarine force in history. They'd strangled an entire nation's economy, but victory came at the cost of killing thousands of men who couldn't fight back, merchant sailors, soldiers packed in transports, civilians traveling between occupied territories. The targeting was legitimate under unrestricted warfare doctrine, but some submariners struggled with moral implications. They'd done what was necessary. They'd done it well, but it wasn't clean or heroic. It was industrial killing at scale, torpedoes fired in darkness, ships exploding, men dying, repeat until enemy shipping ceased to exist. One retired submarine commander, interviewed in the 1970s, reflected, "We celebrated every sinking, we kept score, we painted Japanese flags on our conning towers. But after the war, I started thinking about the men on those ships. Most were merchant sailors just doing their jobs. We killed them from ambush. We didn't give them a chance. That's war. That's how you win. But it's not something I'm proud of, even though it was necessary. I'd do it again because it had to be done. But I wouldn't celebrate it the way we did during the war." That ambivalence captured the reality of submarine warfare. It was necessary. It was effective. It achieved strategic results that justified the methods. But it involved killing at industrial scale with technology that removed personal connection from killing. A submarine commander might sink a transport and kill 3,000 soldiers without ever seeing their faces. The torpedoes did the killing. The ocean did the drowning. The submarine was gone before bodies floated to the surface. It was war at its most, efficient and least personal. The final accounting of the submarine campaign appeared in Strategic Bombing Survey reports, completed in 1946. The surveys concluded that submarine warfare was the single most effective weapon system employed against Japan. Submarines sank more tonnage than strategic bombing destroyed. Submarines strangled Japan's economy more completely than island campaigns disrupted it. Submarines killed more enemy personnel than most surface engagements. The cost in American lives and equipment was remarkably low compared to results achieved. 52 submarines lost, 3,500 men killed. In exchange, over 1,300 enemy ships destroyed, hundreds of thousands of enemy personnel killed, and an entire nation's economy strangled. The Strategic Bombing Survey noted particularly, the submarine campaign succeeded because American forces possessed technological superiority, industrial capacity, tactical flexibility, and intelligence, advantages that Japanese forces could not counter. Japanese convoy defense doctrine, technology, and resources were insufficient from the beginning and became increasingly inadequate as American submarine tactics evolved. By early 1945, Japanese shipping capacity had declined to levels that made continuation of the war economically impossible. The submarine campaign accomplished this result at relatively low cost in American lives and resources. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.